All right, well, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you being here for our session. My name is Mike Fincham. I'm a solutions architect with OVHcloud. This is Brian Stasney. He is a cloud architect with Zerto. This is a partner presentation, so the goal of this, and I can probably illustrate this a little better here with our agenda. We're going to talk about the combined power of using application tiering and disaster recovery, along with dedicated resources, which that's a reference to my product set, which we'll get into, and then combining that with Zerto replication, along with their journaling, to protect all of your workloads in a very cost-effective and flexible manner, and also protect you against cyber threats today. So we're a little bit spread out, but we're going to start out here at the beginning with introducing who OVHcloud is. That's usually the number one question for me here at VMworld. We're working on building our brand awareness. Then we're going to start talking about application tiering. This is just going to be a solution architect kind of conversation for you. If you're not doing tiering with your DR protection today, we'll talk about some of the basic guidelines there and what it can do for you. Then we're going to shift gears. Brian's going to take over and he's going to talk about ransomware today and how it fits into IT resiliency, specific to Zerto and what they can do to help you mitigate those threats. Then we're going to wrap up with some design considerations relative to how you would do this in a OVHcloud data center with the services that I have. All right? Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. And we will save, we'll save about 15 minutes at the end for conversations, questions. We've got a mic here in the middle of the room, and we'll see if we can get your questions answered. So let's start out with just the basic question. Who is OVHcloud? Anybody in the room know OVHcloud, just by show of hands? Anybody come talk to me yet? Yeah, so there it is. Okay, so OVH, this is a catch line. We are the largest cloud provider that you've never heard of. We started 19 years ago in Roubaix, France. We have 28 data centers around the world, including 2 brand new ones here in the United States. We just opened one in Virginia as well as Oregon. We have a 15 terabit per second network that connects all of those data centers together, and we allow our customers access to that for management traffic and replication traffic. Also, we have 33 POPs scattered around that network in which we allow you to access the backbone network to either communicate with us or between multiple data centers. One of the things that's very unique about us and how we leverage the power of our network is that when we provide you bandwidth, we don't charge you ingress and egress charges based upon what you receive from us. It's a wide open 1.5 gigabit per second pipe into your hosted private cloud, so we can automatically offer you savings right off the bat. Another way we offer you savings as part of our networking is that we have anti-DDoS, state-of-the-art, built into our network. We have a total of 5 terabits per second of anti-DDoS capability or capacity built into the network. And we offer that to you at no additional charge above the service line that you're paying with us for your hosted private cloud. So if you're spending money today with Akamai, Arbor Networks, or anybody else that's big in the anti-DDoS game, we can offer you quite savings there. And then in terms of a couple other things that make us unique, we own our own data centers, we build our own servers, we have a very unique approach to data center management, and we always look at our data centers and how we manage them and focus on how we can deliver cost savings to you as a customer as part of that. So what do we offer at OVHcloud? We have 3 pillars within our product sets. The first one is hosted private cloud. We're going to be focusing on this today for most of our session. This is based on VMware software-defined data center. Specifically, it's ESX 6.5, NSX 6.4. We're making an announcement here at VMworld where we'll be supporting a traditional VMware Cloud Foundation stack. I think that comes out today, maybe tomorrow, so we'll save that for later. But in addition to those services, we also have a public cloud based on OpenStack. So this is for more of your ephemeral workloads, lower cost, and it's designed to save you money. So if you've got test dev, for example, that you want to connect to your hosted private cloud, it's a great place to do it in an inexpensive fashion. My third pillar is my dedicated or bare metal servers. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It's bare metal of a wide variety of shapes and sizes, and we offer it to you in an automated fashion, very quickly delivered to you, and you have root. Now what's powerful is the ability to combine these services into a total solution. And one of the things that's unique about it is that we can connect these three services together in a single data center or across multiple data centers around the globe. Remember, I've got 28 data centers around the globe, 33 points of presence. We have a piece of technology we call VRAC. It's essentially a layer 2 adjacency solution that allows us to take these services either within a data center or separate data centers and place them in the same layer 2 space for you. Very, very simple. It's drag and drop. So it very much simplifies your networking management. And then, of course, we support it all with our 24/7 customer support and professional services. What we're focusing on today with regards to disaster recovery is going to make us take a close look at hosted private cloud plus our dedicated bare metal servers. One thing I want to call out right now is that everything that we offer within those two lines of business are dedicated resources. They are single tenant. They belong to just you. There's no multi-tenancy in the platform there. And so we'll talk about some of the power that that brings to you as a customer, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. We're going to start beginning our discussion of disaster recovery, and I have a couple slides here to set the tone. If you're here, you're curious about disaster recovery and possibly ways you could do it better. And there's probably a understanding that a DR event, if it actually occurs to you, it can be very painful. These are some statistics that we gathered from a couple of the analysts that we work with very closely, and it measures it down to the dollar how painful this can be. So if we think at the most broad sense, almost all organizations, 98% of them that experience a DR event, they lose $100,000 per hour of downtime. And then as the organization grows, those numbers get bigger. The next tier up, 81% of organizations that experience a DR event, they lose $300,000 an hour. Moving up, a third of customers or organizations that experience a DR event, they lose between $1 and $5 million an hour. Extremely painful. And then possibly the least happy number up there with the sad face is that 93% of businesses who experience a significant loss of data declare bankruptcy within a year. So how is the DR industry working to mitigate this? How are threats changing, and how are our analyst community and our partners thinking about it in a different way? The truth is that DR is a very mature concept, right? I've been doing it 20 years. The name has changed several times. It was business continuity, then it was DR. Now we're talking about it in terms of IT resiliency. If you pay attention to Zerto's messaging, if you pay attention to Gartner's messaging, the philosophy is starting to change. And there are some things that are happening in the foundations that are driving it. But there are two tiers. So we ask ourselves, what's the difference between DR and IT resiliency? So in the past, where DR was focused on events and downtime, IT resiliency says, okay, how can I be continuously available? And we'll get into the specifics of that in a second. Where DR asks, how can I be reactive in response to events? IT resilience says, how can I be proactively avoiding events in the future? And then most importantly, or probably most easy to understand, for DR, we measure our downtime in hours and days. In the future here, or in the present and the future, IT resilience, downtime is measured in minutes and hours. Now, if I talk about some of the foundational stuff, right, if this has been going on for 20 years, going back, a lot of what you see in DR was driven by cost because we had to do it with a lot of gear, storage-based replication, and we didn't have tools like Zerto, right? Zerto offers us state-of-the-art, very low downtime, very tight replication windows, and we can do it at a fraction of the cost. So now we can start looking at what we would have thought of as very expensive high availability, and we can treat it as IT resiliency. So getting into the specifics a little bit about tiering applications, right? If we think about our DR today, or your DR, let's assume you're doing a DR, and I am going to ask you a question about that. How can we be more efficient in how we protect the workloads? And so if you talk to the analysts, they'll tell you that as they survey their customer base, of the customers that are doing tiering, they see the breakdown that you see here in the graphic. About 30% of their workloads are classified as mission critical. About 34% of them are business critical, and about 36% are non-critical. But if you ask Gartner how many customers are actually doing this today, it's about 39%. So according to Gartner, 61% of customers only have one protected tier. So just out of curiosity, how many of you out there today just have one protected tier? Everything's in one bucket. Show of hands. Those are low hands. Okay. So maybe you guys are tiering, or maybe you want to learn about it today. Why would you want to tier? There's two main reasons that I talk to my customers. So when they express an urgency or a need or a desire to talk about DR, we start talking about best practices. And I ask them, are you tiering your workloads today? And they'll say, well, no. What does that do for me? And I explain to them it gives you flexibility and it gives you an opportunity for cost savings. And the reason is if we take one technology and we apply it across the whole bucket of workloads, I'm constricted there. I have no flexibility. I can't choose to apply one technology in mission critical, one technology in business critical, and another in non-critical. Right? I have no flexibility. I'm bound in. And that drives cost potentially. It can be very expensive if I'm not looking at this. So what I want to do is I want to take my resources, financial and physical, and I want to focus them on my most valuable workloads. And that, in most cases, is going to be business critical and mission critical. And I want to work with the industry-leading vendor to protect those. In this case, we're going to be talking about Zerto and where they fit in. But the first thing I want to do is explore these tiers a little bit. So let's start defining them. What is a non-critical workload? According to the analyst, generally speaking, it's a workload that can experience data loss of up to 24 hours. And then it's completely feasible to restore from an off-site backup. That's suitable. What does that look like in the field as I go talk to customers in SE? A lot of times that's backing up to a device that's in my building, and that device of whatever type is reflecting to another one of my buildings, and that's my DR. Or maybe it's even tape. Believe it or not, tape's still got a very valid life out there today. As I move up the pyramid, what's a business critical workload? Well, this is a workload that is absolutely critical, and I can only tolerate very, very tight recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, because if I miss on those, the business is going to suffer, and we'll define those in a second. Mission critical at the top, this is our HA layer. Zero data loss is what we're shooting for here, and that's tough, right? If you've been in this business a while, that usually means it's expensive and tough to manage, and there's not a lot of tools that help me get there. Let's talk about mission critical for a second and what it really looks like today. So for most of my customers, these are applications whose availability will take down the business if it's not there. It directly impacts revenue, it directly impacts customer service, and if I'm down, it directly impacts my reputation. So how do I architect for resiliency there? I shoot for HA. Or I use clustering, or I use native replication technologies. Now, all of you are in different businesses, and it's very hard to be specific here. But what does it look like in general? Stretch clusters at a database layer, or if I've got an e-commerce suite that's got a replication technology in it, I try to use that. I look at the application stack, and I look for the tools that are specifically available, because we're shooting for zero downtime, zero data loss. One of the things that I always coach my customers to do is put pilot light applications in their mission critical. So what is a pilot light application? These are identity services. It's Active Directory, it's DNS, it's your VPN server, potentially it's an SSL server. The reason these are mission critical is that they need to be running all the time. They need to be up and they need to be syncing to a replica in your data center so that they have current copies of your AD, of your DNS, so that when you execute at the business critical layer with Zerto or whatever you're using, when those VMs power up, they know where they are, they know who they are, and they know where to go to get to your end users. right? I use that in 100% of my designs. I talk to my customers, and they have to make me back down from that. To me, that is just best practice. Generally speaking, what do I see when I talk to customers? Usually it's SQL databases here. Sometimes it's Oracle. And I've got a special tool for Oracle we're going to talk about on the next slide. E-commerce fits in here sometimes. I don't run into it as much as you would think I would. That's fairly rare. So, let me go back one. So going back to my product lines, one of the things that's unique about OVHcloud is that in addition to my hosted private cloud, I have those bare metal servers. What you find when you start doing an analysis of customers' data centers is that on average they're about 90x% virtualized. There is some single-digit percentage in their data center that's not virtualized today. Why is it not virtualized? Well, it could be for performance reasons. A lot of people endemically believe that SQL should never be virtualized, or any database should be virtualized for performance reasons, right? Or it could be that it's a really old workload that nobody wants to touch, nobody wants to even begin to virtualize, or it can't be virtualized, it's so old. This is where dedicated servers become a great fit, right? You don't have to have that conversation about going physical to virtual with me. I have bare metal hosts in my data centers that I can connect via VRack that you see there in the diagram. Layer 2 adjacency, drag and drop, simple. Another great example here, probably 1 to 2 in 10 customers I talk about are running some version of Oracle. And Oracle, as we all know, they have licensing requirements that don't necessarily align with cloud providers. So putting them on a single tenant host allows you to constrain the number of cores that license can see, and thereby you don't wind up paying more for your Oracle license than you should. Right? So that's why single tenant, bare metal, can save you a lot of money, and it meets your business need. So to me, this is a very powerful value proposition from a service provider. There's not a lot of us out here today that offer the virtual and the physical capability in the same data center. Now, this is where we're going to focus on Zerto a little bit. The business critical zone, these are applications that are extremely important to the business, but they can experience some degree of downtime. Now that's all individual to each one of you in the room. Downtime is definitely measured in what you do and how you measure your revenue and your end user sat. What's great about Zerto is that they measure their replication intervals in seconds. So when you're talking about a recovery point objective with Zerto, you're not talking about 5 minutes, you're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. So extremely fresh data. The other thing is, I want these VMs to come up as quickly as possible, right? I've already staged my identity services and mission critical, so I want these VMs to wake up, and I want them to wake up quickly. And I want to do it in an automated and orchestrated fashion, right? So we're here at VMworld. VMware has a solution for this. It's been around a long time. We probably all are aware of Site Recovery Manager and what it did. In my mind, that was a great groundbreaking piece of software, and Zerto has fundamentally improved on that, because they brought with it not only the advanced orchestration, but these incredible continuous data protection capabilities. So for us, the ability to support Zerto at the business critical layer really allows us to bring best of breed to our customers that are looking for a hosted private cloud that gives them native vCenter access, native NSX manager access, all of the stuff I talked about in the network layer, and you get to control your Zerto virtual manager, right? Very powerful. Now, just as a general recommendation, and I saw a lot of nods when I mentioned SRM, so this is kind of going to be a moment that you already understand. When you take the time to work with Zerto and enable it and deploy it, you really need to take time and build out your virtual protection group. So if you haven't seen Zerto yet and you're just starting down that road, Zerto virtual protection groups are equivalent to consistency groups roughly within SRM. Group your virtual or your VMs within subgroups where you want this one to wake up first, insert boot orders, then I'm going to do the next group, and so forth. We always coach our customers to follow best practices with Zerto. And when I talk to my customers about business critical, I define it as the Zerto zone. This is where they rule the marketplace. And that's why we've partnered with them. Now the last zone, the one at the bottom of the pyramid, and this is probably the one I run into the most when I start doing discovery with brand new customers, is the non-critical zone. A lot of customers today are treating everything as non-critical workloads, and they haven't taken the step up into the Zerto zone yet. These are applications that, by my definitions, they can experience downtime without dramatically affecting business. Unfortunately, a lot of customers will stick to business critical here too, for cost reasons. The recovery time objective, if you're doing it in a tiered fashion, should be about 4 to 24 hours, and your recovery point objective could be up to 24 hours. What you want to do here to save money, right, so you can spend money on Zerto and you can spend money on mission critical, is look for a low cost or a zero cost option here. So I'll name call on VMware here. This is a great place to use vSphere replication. vSphere replication has a recovery point objective of 5 to 15 minutes. It's a free tool from VMware. It's asynchronous replication. It comes with no automation or orchestration, right? You would have to bolt on SRM to do it there. I did a lot of customers where that's all we did because of cost. That's all they could afford. They were on a very, very limited budget. But another thing, and this is probably more common with the customers I'm talking to now, this is where customers are using what we would think of as traditional backup technology. So there's a Veeam shirt in the room. Think about traditional backup, Commvault. You could be backing up to a storage device in your data center and restoring from that. So the way that looks from an OVHcloud view is you could take that same software, either bring your own or buy what I'm offering, back up from your prem into my cloud to a dedicated host. I have storage hosts, which we'll talk about in a second, that are designed to receive your backups. You manage your primary copy locally. I'm a secondary copy. And then when you want to restore from those, you just automate a hosted private cloud into existence and rebuild your VMs in my center. Now, it's not going to be as quick as Zerto. No way. You're talking about, half a day to 2 days worth of rebuild at least. But just depending on your scenario, that might be a fit for a portion of the workloads you're doing. Guaranteed resources make a difference. I think I've touched on a good bit of this, right? As I mentioned, everything I'm talking about to you today is single tenant. You have root, you have direct vCenter access, you are the NSX manager. It means inherently it's more secure. It means you have more control as a vCenter admin or an NSX admin. But it also means it's more secure. It's secure from a service level agreement perspective because me as a service provider, I'm providing you fiscal assurance that if you're down, I'm going to provide you remunerations at maybe the network layer, the server layer, whatever you've purchased from me, I've got an SLA standing behind it. But you also get to construct your own security policies. You're not bound to a multi-tenant security model where you have limited control. Right? You can build multiple NSX edges and do whatever you want. You can set up bastion hosts and isolate everything. Do whatever you want. It's yours to control. And this is where we kind of pivot to Zerto. Using Zerto for their incredible continuous data protection as well as their automation and orchestration, they also have a security story that I learned about a year and a half ago that really spoke to me, and that's their ability to help you mitigate against malware that's infiltrated VMs that you're replicating into my cloud, right? And so imagine, if you will, for a second, you've got a VM that's protected, maybe it's a VDI or something else, it gets compromised and you're replicating it. If you're not doing AV checks against your DR, when that VM boots up, it can be down and it can affect things around it. How do I mitigate against that? And this is where I'm going to bring Brian into the conversation. Actually, I'm not. Almost.
One more slide.
One more slide. So, just some general tiers on tiering. The first two, I'm going to say these can take place in either order. What you have to do, regardless, you have to know what your details are. For most of my customers, we start with a vCenter export, unless they have vRealize automation, VROPS, or something else that can give us a more detailed consumption type view. But you have to know what you're protecting before you protect it, right? And then, this is the hard part, if you're in the IT admin world, you have to start engaging your stakeholders, because most likely somebody's come to you and said, okay, I'm not satisfied with what we're doing today for DR. I want you to do a cloud-based initiative. I want you to take a look at the providers out there, and I want you to make a recommendation, and I want it to be inexpensive, but I want the most power out of it you can squeeze, right? So in order to do that, and in order to tier effectively, you have to know whose VMs are important and whose are less important. And frankly, everybody thinks their workloads are important. In the first round through the business, they're going to tell you they're all mission critical. And you're going to have to set the expectation that they're not, right? Only at best, a third of your VMs are mission critical. But in order for this to work, you have to talk to everybody, understand the business need behind the VM, and start working to classify it. The other thing is use mission critical sparingly. Mission critical is expensive by its definition, right? It's HA. So it should be, generally speaking, less than 25%. The analyst number I showed you earlier was around 30. Most of my customers, I try and keep them to pilot light plus a database or whatever else they really have to have. Keeps the cost down. And then lastly, don't over tier. 3 tiers is a sweet spot. If you do 5 or 6, it's going to get too hard to manage and it's going to get out of control. And that's it for my tiering talk. I'm going to hand this over to Brian. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. So today we're talking a little bit about what Mike mentioned, utilizing Zerto to recover your workloads if you've been impacted by ransomware. So they've made it through the protections, potentially, that Mike mentioned OVH provides against their best effort. You've already been impacted. Your VMs are down. You come in one morning, you see a request on your screen requesting, say, $51,000 in Bitcoin. What do you do at that point? So let's address what ransomware looks like. So these are statistics that are a bit dated, and they're that way for a reason. Let me display all of them here, just to show you how things have grown. So the earliest year we had statistics for ransomware were back in 2015, though they were first detected back in 2013. They've also really got attention for some really large impacts in 2015. In 2015, they estimated to have a $325 million impact on businesses worldwide. 1 month, you had about 68,000 infections. This is across all industries. 5,700 per day, of course. That just means they're impacting everywhere across the world. We all know the common variants. CryptoLocker, SamSam were some of the most popular that are still around today in different fashions. They use different attack vectors. Some are based on phishing type explorations. Some are direct attacks like SamSam that try to exploit weaknesses in your organization other than just the classic phishing mechanism. So again, really first detected in 2013, multiple variants, mainly CryptoLocker, and we saw a monumental increase since then. Now, I left that $325 million number up there from 2015 for a reason. In 2017, the most recent year we have statistics, the impact was $5 billion. So as you can see, they're still very much active, and they're still very much a problem despite our efforts to detect them early and to block them and to mitigate them. So this is an actual example from City of Atlanta that happened earlier this year. Some of you may have heard about it in Wired. It made a couple of different publications for a number of different reasons. So long story short, back in March 22nd of this year, they came in on a Thursday. The admins and the employees of the City of Atlanta came in and saw a request on their screen saying that their files had been locked and attackers were requesting $51,000 in Bitcoin. Now they had no idea what to do. Essentially, they were locked. So they brought in a number of consultants. They paid over $650,000 of SecureWorks to assess the damage and perform an action plan. They awarded multiple contracts to try to migrate to a different solution to mitigate potential further impacts, and ended up paying basically $51,000, or very equivalent to the initial ask, just in PR, to try to assuage the community. What was the actual impact of this attack? So during the attack, the City of Atlanta lost most municipal services, things that impact people every day. People couldn't pay their bills. People couldn't pay their water bills. The courts were down. The courts couldn't service new cases. Police lost access to their dash cam videos, for example, and some of that data was lost permanently. So imagine this is real impact on people's lives, people's cases, criminal cases. Effectively, the city was shut down for multiple days, and they're actually still working on mitigating the full impact. Not just recovering the data, which most of it, or a lot of it, was unrecoverable, but preventing the issue from happening again. They said they spent about overall $2.5 million or $2.7 million initially in the recovery efforts. They're looking at spending another further $9 million to recover from the effort. And if you compare the City of Atlanta to a public company, the revenue would be the company would essentially be a company with a revenue of about $60 million. When you consider they're spending over $9 million or $11 million total as a result of this issue, that's significant. And that would be significant for any company. So moving on. So the typical data protection solutions. So right now, before in most recent years, you had two pretty much common solutions. You had your typical backup, which had particular, let's say a 24-hour RPO. You back up once a night. If something happens the next day around midnight, or let's say not midnight, let's say like 8 o'clock or 8 p.m. the next day, you're looking at maybe 16 hours of dead space. Exposure, data you can't recover. If you're going back to your previous night's backup. Other technologies, of course, have come along. Snapshot or array-based replication, or snapshots, for example, maybe a 4-hour RTO, essentially their RPO, sorry. You're doing snapshots every 4 hours. But again, that has its own issues. It's not very granular. You're doing it at a LUN level. So, where does your data reside? You have to maybe organize your VMs, your VMDKs on a per LUN basis. You can't just restore a single VM. You're storing a LUN to a particular point in time. And that, of course, can be problematic. And of course, for ransomware hits, you don't have that granular restore. You have to restore to maybe 4 hours ago, maybe certain LUNs. Or if you're using traditional backup, restore to a previous day. If you find corruption that day, well, then you're going back a previous day. And of course, it scales in that linear fashion, trying to go back to find out when you were initially impacted by ransomware. And of course, data loss equals downtime. It certainly did for the city of Atlanta. So what did Zerto change? So Zerto, whether you're familiar with it or not, has one key feature, and that's our journal, among many others. Now, our journal is essentially a change log, and it generates checkpoints multiple times per minute. Generally, every 10 to 15 seconds, there's a checkpoint inserted into our journal. And what essentially is a DVR functionality, DVR type functionality. If you're protecting a VM with Zerto, when you go to failover or recover, whether this be a failover or migration, you can pick a point in time from our journal from which to recover that VM. So by default, if you went to failover a Zerto VM, it would recover from the most recent checkpoint in our journal, which is, based on our RPO, about 10 to 15 seconds at most behind current data. But, for example, if you're impacted by ransomware, you could elect to fail back to a time 5 minutes ago, or 5 minutes and 30 seconds ago, or 2 hours and 1 minute and 30 seconds ago. It really is a DVR type functionality that gives you the granularity to go back to the most recent point in time you had valid data. So you're not having to go back 4 hours, you're not having to go back a day or 2 days. You can go back 15 seconds if that's what you need. It gives you the flexibility to choose the data you want from the period in time that's useful to you. So what exactly is our journal? It is a configurable changelog. By default, it's set to 24 hours or 1 day. So you have 24 hours worth of checkpoints to fail back to. It's configurable. It can be configurable, again, from 1 hour of a minimum up to 30 days. And since it is a changelog, it is compressed. Depending on your change rate, of course, the size can be smaller or bigger. But it's not going to be essentially the size of the changes of that particular VM. It is compressed. And on average, it's about 10% of the total size of the VM for a basic configuration. The journal essentially is a first in, first out buffer. In addition to the base VMDKs of the VM, this is an additional buffer. The new changes or changes that come into the VM are written to that journal. As they age out of the journal, for example, if your journal is 24 hours and 1 second, that data gets flushed down to the base VMDK. So it really is just a change log that gets flushed down to the disks as time moves on. So recovery from infection. I mentioned earlier that we're going to have a discussion about if you're already impacted by ransomware, how do you recover and how does Zerto make that easy? So Zerto has a really concise, simple, easy, few-click way to recover from a ransomware impact. This is an example of our dashboard showing multiple protected workloads. And I mentioned earlier it's very easy. And when you go to recover a workload with Zerto, ransomware notwithstanding, it really is about 4 clicks. You click a failover button, which is in the lower right-hand corner of the interface. You'll select which workloads you want to recover, which point in time you want to recover them from, and click the failover button. And thanks to orchestration, about 10 to 15 minutes later, you'll have a VM that's running, that's live, that you can open a console to, you can RDP to. It's a functional live workload at that point. And if you do a failover test, for example, if you go back to a point in time maybe 5 minutes ago, the VM's still corrupted, you're still impacted by ransomware, cancel the test, start one from 10 minutes ago. You can keep doing that until you find the point in time your data is sound and you want to recover to that point in time. We give that flexibility. And it really is that easy. Fail over, if the data is still corrupt, cancel the test, fail over to an earlier point in time. Find the data when it is from a point in time when you need it and when it's viable, and you have that flexibility. Just going through the steps, and really it is that easy. You pick the workload you want to fail over, from what point in time you want to fail over them to, and start the failover test. And thanks to RTOs and orchestration, 10 to 15 minutes later, you have viable workloads. This is just reiterating that point. So in addition to regular VMs, we can also recover files using that same functionality. This is great for, for example, you don't really need just that, you don't need an entire VM from 50 minutes ago. Say a customer corrupted a spreadsheet. So you probably have people in the office that have had spreadsheets that edit every 10 to 15 minutes or so, or even more often. They're always entering data, always changing them. Someone comes to you and says, I have this spreadsheet that's got critical data on it, edit it multiple times a day. The last time I edited it was probably noon, but I need it from 12:15. You can do that for them. They want it at 12:15 in 30 seconds. You can do that for them as well. You can recover individual files and folders using our journal just as you can recover entire VMs or entire workloads, or entire applications consisting of multiple VMs. So it's useful for a number of things, anywhere from recovering entire VMs, individual applications, and you can restore the files anywhere. By default, you can just restore the file or download it from the ZVM interface, the Zerto Virtual Manager interface, our dashboard. You can also choose to save it to a file share, for example, for the customer to pick up. So very convenient for them. The key takeaway is we make recovering workloads easy from any point in time. It's no longer you having to go back to a previous day's backup. It's no longer about having to go back to a snapshot or London-based snapshot. You pick the workloads you want to restore. You pick the time you want to restore them from, down to the second most often, and you press 2 buttons. And we do the rest of the work for you. The workloads come up, and they're useful and viable.
All right, back to me.
Mike.
Okay, so we're in the home stretch here. I see a few of you getting tired or maybe hungry, so let me bring it home for you. This is a little bit of a recap. We're going to talk about how you would build this out on OVHcloud. So, wrong button. There we go. Talking about hosted private cloud for a second. How do I deliver it to you as an end customer if you ask me for some? So remember, we deliver the software-defined data center. You as a customer, your control plane is vCenter. NSX Manager, we deploy it to the defaults established by VMware. We offer you, at a minimum, 2 hosts always. Now what I should mention is, just like I told you I have a bunch of different types of dedicated hosts, bare metal hosts, I have the same as far as the ESXi hosts. I have really small hosts that have just 32 gigs of RAM on them. I have really big ones that have 512 gigs of RAM on the host. But when I start working for you, I always deliver 2 hosts to start. And we configure it for HA. Now for production workloads, that's great. I'm building in the protection for you right off the bat. But if you're a DR customer, as an SE, I tell you, well, hey, you really don't need HA and DR unless you're going to be running for 30 days or something. And we could always automate a host there later. Let's keep your monthly costs low. Let's turn off HA and let's use both of those hosts as replication targets. Great way to save money right off the bat. Now, by default, I also give you 2 data stores. We use our primary storage as NFS-based, scales up very large, as high as 2 petabytes. And then I have a group of add-ons. So we've been talking about Zerto today. We also support VMware's hybrid cloud extension service if you're interested in things like layer 2 extension or migrations of virtual machines into the cloud. It's a great piece of software for that. We're going to be offering VROPs here in the near future. And then I have a really interesting story around IP addresses. So my IP addresses, for some reason, are a bargain. We have a very low cost, they're a one-time charge, and they're routable, they're public IPs. So if you don't have your own IP address space today, I can offer it to you at a very low cost. On the dedicated server side, again, this is the bare metal, I have 5 families of servers. So at the infrastructure level, these are my entry-level to mid-level servers. They can be single CPU in a lot of cases. They can be single NIC, and they can even be single power supply. But they can also be very small, 32 gigs of RAM. Just depends on your use case. If you've got something that you just consider to be fungible or temporary, it's a great place to land it. If you need something that's more enterprisey, that's where my HA comes in. Here I've got Intel Xeon Gold processors. It's always 2 CPUs, everything's redundant, much higher cores, much higher threads. And this is where we can do more robust work. So if you'll go back to when I was talking about doing backup targets in the cloud, you could choose, if you had your own backup and you wanted to use me as a secondary, you could back up to the infrastructure hosts, they're very inexpensive, or you could back up to my storage hosts. These are large hosts with a whole bunch of disks in them, and you could replicate to them, and then if you needed to, restore into hosted private cloud. I also have GPU-based hosts. So this is for production VDI or for DR VDI. You see some of the other use cases on the far side. And then, this is kind of an oddball, I know, but I also have game servers. If you happen to be in the gaming business, I have some high-frequency desktop servers that can be used to host very small micro instances of games. Now, what does it look like? Here's the nerdy topology, and it may be hard to read if you're in the way back. This is a very common deployment for me if I was to work with a customer today. I do have a mix of replication technologies in the middle, but let's start on the left-hand side. This is you as a customer. You've got at least a couple different network segments in there. You have some type of edge gateway that allows you to connect across public or maybe private networks. And we're going to have on the far side, in the OVH data center, we're going to have a group of servers. If you look at the networking layer, most of my customers have a DMZ. They have their clustered workloads. Remember, clustered would be mission critical. And then they have their replication workloads on different network segments. And if you notice on the far right-hand side, those are tied off to VRAC. Remember, VRAC is my data center adjacency solution that allows me to connect things in the data center. It also allows me to connect across a private line to you. So let's look at the middle piece, right? Replication can basically take 3 paths into my data center. Right? At the lowest level, it could take an internet-based replication, right? Over IPsec, VPN, or whatever else you want to use. I always think about vSphere replication there. That's the most common one. But of course, you can put Zerto over the internet as well. You can replicate across VPN. And at the bottom on the black solid line, you could replicate across a private circuit. We support layer 2 and layer 3 private lines. So AVPN, layer 2 Ethernet, MPLS, those are all supported. In the middle, the green dotted line, this is our hybrid cloud manager service. So remember, that's the live VM migration tool from VMware. What that allows you to do is actually vMotion your virtual machines from your data center into my data center and never power them off. So that's great if you're evacuating a data center, if you're saying something like, I got to power off this data center over here, I need to move to the cloud. But what people don't think about, especially if you live on the East Coast, that's a great tool for DR avoidance. Let's say you need to fail over your VMs, but you can't turn them off for a week. You could use this tool to vMotion them out of the path of harm somewhere in the middle of the country or to the West Coast. They can still be running, they can route back home. And it's a pretty neat way to manage things. We've done that with a few customers. And then the important thing to point out is that the private line terminates to the VRAC, which then brings you back to your network. So this could be 2 or 3 different customer networks all mashed together, or a typical deployment. I just wanted to show it to you there. This is my last slide before I wrap up. I do want to give you my contact information if you need it. Feel free to stop up here and get cards. We are going to do questions. But that's my email address if you want to reach out to me. We have a website and a Twitter account. We also have a huge booth. If you haven't been into the Solution Exchange yet, we're right in the front when you walk in, dead center. Giant booth, guys in blue shirts like me. We'd be happy to talk to you, especially about DR. I'll be there all week. So we're booth number 1200 if you haven't made it to the Solution Exchange yet. And then, of course, VMware really wants me to reiterate that we would like you to fill out your survey. Now, questions. We've got 17 minutes left in the session. I know a lot of folks are leaving because they're probably hungry or ready to go. Yes, sir. You can either speak up from where you are or you can use the mic behind you, whatever you prefer.
Couple questions for the Zerto gentleman.
Sure.
Have you had an opportunity to actually perform a restore because of a malware attack, or is this just a theory of that you almost worked out how that can be done? That's the first question. Second question is, as far as Zerto is concerned, is what about application consistent snapshots, the biasing of that? Are you using third-party software to use bias? Is biasing built into Zerto? Those are the 2 questions.
Okay. First and foremost, in ransomware, yes. Simply because before I came to Zerto, I worked for a regional CSP down in Houston, which is where I'm from. I supported Zerto in production for 2 years, along with other products as well. So I mainly maintained their VMware virtualization, storage, and DR practice. So yes, I've had the opportunity to recover multiple times, from ransomware specifically, and other corruption as well.
From a malware perspective, whatever.
Ransomware specifically, yes. Yes. And in that case, they came in on a Monday morning and got something very similar, a warning requesting a certain amount of Bitcoin. And they wanted to recover to a certain point in time over the weekend. And we actually had to do, that's the reason I gave the example of multiple recoveries. They didn't know when they had been impacted. And since it was over a weekend and no one noticed until Monday, they had to recover to multiple points in time to figure out when the corruption actually occurred. It ended up being, I think, midday Saturday is when they found the most recent viable checkpoint. So as far as biasing, we don't do that actually, since we replicate at the storage level. We're actually replicating at the hypervisor level. Before it hits storage, we're replicating at the block level and sending those chain blocks to a corresponding DR site. So for questing, we actually had a product that was VSS enabled for a while to address that concern. We found the take rate on it was as low as 1% to 2%. People just weren't using it because it wasn't needed. For application consistency, to further on that, how we offer application consistency is when you create virtual protection groups, which are simply a group of 1 or more VMs replicating, one of our cornerstones is application consistency, in that if you have an application that consists of multiple VMs, the idea is you put all of those VMs in one VPG. When you fail them over, they come up from the same point in time down to the second. Hence, you get a consistent application, as opposed to traditional recovery where you have where you're backing up each VM individually, And depending on when your backup window occurred, you bring up one VM from 12:40 last night, one VM up from 11 o'clock the previous night, depending on when their backup completed and how much data was being backed up. With Zerto, if you put the VMs in one consistency group, they all come up from the same point in time down to the second. That's part of our solution.
And one last question
Sure.
is, and I don't know if this would be long or anything, but Zerto versus recover point. Of course, recover point, I believe, is slowly going out. But can you give a couple of advantages that Zerto has over recover point since Zerto was designed by the same people that designed recover?
That would be a much longer question. I'll be at the booth the rest of the day. I can go into that. That's a very good question, but it's a very long question. So, but I will be at the booth the rest of the day. I'm actually working the afternoon shift, so if you have any questions, feel free to stop by. Yes. So we're entirely software-based. So the way it works is we have two components. One called the Zerto Virtual Manager, which provides the interface, the orchestration, basically manages the solution. And then we have what are called VRAs, which are virtual application appliances. They're small daemon appliances that are deployed by the Zerto Virtual Manager. You deploy one per host at each site. So every host that either has a protected workload or you could potentially recover a workload to will have one of our VRAs running on it. They're lightweight, 1 core, 3 gigs of RAM by default, and they do the actual work. They sit in the storage stack of the host. They monitor the storage stack for committed writes. You're in between the committed write and when it goes onto storage. They copy that write, compress it, and send it to a VRA at the corresponding site. So it's entirely block-based, and we're sitting on the individual hypervisors in the stack, essentially. Yes. Yes, vCenter at both sites, ZVM at both sites. So if a failover were to occur or an entire site were to go down, you can initiate a failover from either site. If you lose site A, you simply log into the corresponding ZVM at site B and start the failover there. So.
What sort of protections? So I noticed you guys were talking about the file shares. My environment is built off of NetApp, so we present file shares as a SIP share. Do you guys offer any sort of protection against that or replication for that?
So that, unfortunately, no. Since it's not visible to the hypervisor itself, we don't have any visibility to it. The same would go for in-guest iSCSI as an example. Since we don't see that at the hypervisor level, we can't protect it, unfortunately.
And then the follow-up question is, okay, that's that. Let's say I had a file share that's presented by Windows Server.
Right.
Are protected and
Yes.
down to the file level piece. I have disaster recovery, it fails over. People are working out the disaster recovery, and then we want to fail back. How are those changes that are written during the disaster recovery replicated back down to my production environment so they can work off of, where they were when they were working on the VR?
Right. So actually, I have part of a solution that encompasses that called reverse protection. So say, for example, if you wanted to do a failover in an orchestrated manner, say you've got a company that's in Florida, right? A hurricane is coming, their DR site is somewhere further inland, like say Atlanta. So they want to do an orchestrated failover. They see the hurricane coming, they fail over their workloads to Atlanta. How do you get back? How do you get back those changes? We have something called reverse protection. What that simply does is flips the direction of replication. Once you land in Atlanta, Zerto, as an orchestrated manner, will automatically start using the original VMDKs as pre-seed data and start replicating back to prod. So that way, when the danger is passed, you can simply do another failover, fail back to prod, and then replication is reinitialized back to your DR site. All in an orchestrated manner. You check one box, say, I want reverse protection, and it's handled for you. So you can get there and back again.
So do you have anything for that SIP share type component as far as DR, failover, and replicate essentially fail back?
I don't have a tool for you to deploy on-prem, but with NetApp, if I had NetApp in my data center, that would make it really easy. Right, I don't. In my data center, I'm ZFS. So I think you and I would have to look for something third party to look at doing that separately. What's great is that once it's in my data center and it's over there, we take snapshots every hour of all your storage and it's available for you to restore from in the cloud. The replication back piece, we'd still have to address like you did with him. Yeah. I'm more of an IaaS guy, so I don't bring a lot of software to the party other than my own automation software.
Sure, yeah, but wasn't sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Thank you.
In regards to replication, if my second site, say for disaster recovery, say it's in the cloud,
Yeah.
and say I wanted to, at this point in time, I'm going to, run everything in the cloud, just, spin up servers or whatever, for say a hurricane.
Right.
For 72 hours, wait for that to pass, and then how does it work bringing everything on premise? Is it the exact same as though I had two sites, but everything just, I go, okay, now I want to move everything back.
Yeah.
Use my production network here.
It's essentially the same thing. I mean, you're going from one site to another, except it's going from VR back to prod. It doesn't matter to us. It all looks the same. Yeah, you have the same interface at both sites. You have the same the same functionality at both sites. You just be pressing the failover button from the other site instead of pressing it from your site. So that's simple.
Any other questions? No bare metal recovery?
Well, you mentioned you had alternative software as dedicated physical host, right?
Yes, I do.
How does Zerto fit into
So Zerto doesn't yet,
Doesn't yet.
right? So if you looked at their pitch for 7,
Well, even then, physical applications are still coming. That's since we're born virtual. Virtual workloads are our forte. Physical is being looked at as a common ask because it's a hole in the overall disaster recovery IT resilience picture. We're looking at it, no specific software quite yet, but it is being looked at as a common question.
yeah, I think it was out past 7 on the roadmap
Yes.
at Con. So it was, they have release 7 coming up, and then out past 7 on the roadmap was physical. But that's where, when I was talking about working with other tools, I mean, you could certainly bring your own tool there. So let's say while you were waiting for Zerto to integrate it as part of their suite, you had something else that you located. There's nothing stopping you from replicating that over yourself, right? And I know for a fact there's a few providers in there, I'm sorry, that offer it. But you would obviously want to buy Zerto when it came out.
Right. Sure.
So you guys provide a migration service if someone's trying to get a VR data center into. Do y'all provide that as like part of the service offering, or is that different?
So there's 2 answers to that. Let's start with, what do we do today? We help you get your site configured. If you're working on getting your replication targeted and set up, we'll absolutely help you with that. Do you have guys like me that have a specialty in Zerto that can maybe help you a little bit? Yes. Do I have a formal professional services organization yet to support that? That's on my roadmap. So ProServe, we absolutely recognize, and we're going to implement it for DR, but today it would be a mishmash of somebody in pre-sales like me that wants to make sure you're up and running and billing, or our operational guys helping you get your software configured. Okay? Yes, sir?
More for Zerto, guys, for an on-premises thing. So I go to quite frequently premises that get hit with ransomware, and some of the really clever people have got their backups on the same premises, and then their backups are also hit by the ransomware.
Right.
Your particular tool, have you got any kind of network protection built into it, or is that something for the customers to sort themselves out with?
That would be a separate topic or a separate solution. We're simply data protection, essentially.
Can you hit that last piece? You said network. What were you looking for specifically?
To stop propagation, so we see quite often that you'll get the initial point of infection, and then because of the nature of the malware, it will propagate across the network, and it can see your backup solution, it'll have it away.
So that, my answer there is that's where you should be looking at NSX and using microsegmentation, right? So if you can talk to the customer that's had that failure and say, look, you should consider a DR target that includes with it NSX, right? I don't know if you've done any training yet on NSX, but that allows you to lock down every virtual machine essentially and say you have permissions to go just here and here, right? So it compromises it mitigates what you just described. That's where I can step in and say NSX augments that very nicely. And it becomes a layered security model, right? Anybody else? Well, thank you guys for staying. It was a great session. I really appreciate your attendance.
We got one.
Have a great conference. If you want to come up and say hi, please do. If you like a business card, we've got those.
Appreciate it.